The resignation letter sat in Maya's drafts folder for 11 days. She hadn't sent it. She hadn't deleted it either. It just lived there, suspended between cowardice and courage, a monument to the version of herself she was slowly becoming. Someone who stayed too long in rooms that no longer wanted her. The fluorescent lights of the Hargrove Consulting Group's 42nd floor had a particular way of aging a person. She'd noticed it in the mirror that morning. Something behind her eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago. Something scraped hollow like a house after a fire. 34 years old. 8 years building someone else's empire. 2 years watching a younger colleague absorb her accounts, her clients, her ideas, repackaged and credited upward with a smile she'd once called genuine. She needed air. That was all she told herself when she grabbed her coat at noon on a Tuesday and walked 6 blocks south to the waterfront park. Just air. Just 20 minutes of sky before she returned to the slow erosion of her professional dignity. That's where she saw him. He was sitting on a bench near the water, no suit jacket, sleeves rolled to the elbows, forearms resting on his knees like a man mid-thought he couldn't finish. She didn't know it was Elliot Strauss, founder and CEO of Strauss Development Group, a name she'd seen on building facades and boardroom decks, not at first. What she saw first was the way his jaw was set against the wind, the breadth of his shoulders, under a white linen shirt that pulled across his back when he exhaled, dark hair, strong hands turning a paper, coffee cup between his palms, like he was trying to solve it. Something moved through her before her brain caught up with it. A pull, low and immediate, humming under her sternum like a frequency she'd forgotten she could receive. She tried to look away. She sat down on the next bench, 15 feet of reasonable distance between them, and she told herself she was watching the water. She wasn't watching the water. His eyes, when they found her, and they did find her, with a directness that felt almost physical, were slate gray and unhurried. He didn't look away when she caught him looking. Neither did she. Her pulse made a decision without consulting her. "You've been staring at that river like it owes you something," he said. She blinked. "Excuse me?" "I do the same thing." He gestured toward the water. "Figured you might want someone to tell you it doesn't help." Maya laughed before she meant to. Too real, stripped of professional polish. He shifted on the bench and she told herself not to watch the way his shirt moved across his chest when he turned toward her. She watched anyway. There was something in the line of his mouth. Not quite arrogance, not quite ease, something that lived in the territory between the two, that made her want to figure out which one it actually was. His name came later. Over coffee he'd bought from a cart without asking if she wanted one, simply returning with 2 cups like the matter was settled. The presumptuousness of it should have bothered her. It didn't, which bothered her more. They sat closer now. The 15 feet collapsed to 3, and she could smell his cologne. Something cedar dark and clean, and she had to concentrate very deliberately on his words, rather than the line of his throat when he spoke. He was in the middle of a crisis. He said it simply, no theater. The board wanted him to sell a division he'd built from nothing. 300 employees, most of them people he'd personally hired. He'd been at this bench since 7 a.m. "Because apparently," he said, "I can destroy a thing or I can sit here and not destroy it. Those are my 2 options today." Maya looked at him. "Has anyone actually asked how you are through all of this?" He turned. The question landed somewhere visible. She saw it cross his face before he locked it back down, something raw flickering behind the gray eyes. "No," he said. "Not once." The wind moved off the river, cold and salt-sharp. Their hands brushed, reaching for their cups at the same moment, and neither pulled back with appropriate speed. His fingers were warm. His gaze dropped briefly to her mouth, then back up, and then he didn't pretend she hadn't noticed. She was in trouble. She knew it the way you know a storm before you see clouds. He kissed her 8 days later. They'd met at the waterfront again, she'd told herself. She was going for a walk, the same lie she'd told 3 days running. He was laughing at something she'd said. His head dipped close to hers. And then he wasn't laughing anymore. His hand came up slowly, palm curving along her jaw like a question. She answered by closing the distance herself. The kiss was not gentle. It was the kind that happens when 2 people have been circling each other, past the point of reason, a collision, his mouth urgent and warm against hers, his other hand sliding into her hair. She gripped the front of his shirt and the world contracted. His lips, the cedar salt taste of him, the low sound he made, in the back of his throat that she felt the full length of her spine. He pressed her back against the low stone wall of the waterfront railing. Bodies flush, his heartbeat crashing as hard as hers through 2 layers of fabric. They kissed until breathing required deliberate effort. When they finally broke apart, foreheads touching, eyes still closed, she could feel him trembling slightly. Or maybe that was her. "Maya," he said. Just her name. Like a warning he wasn't going to follow through on. She didn't want him to follow through on it. That was the problem. The professional complication arrived on a Thursday, cold and absolute. She hadn't told him where she worked. He hadn't told her that Hargrove Consulting Group was being acquired by Strauss Development. She found out the way everyone did. A company-wide email. His name in the subject line. Her stomach dropping clean through the floor. He called that evening. "I found out 3 hours after we met," he said. "I was going to tell you." When? A pause. When it felt right. And it never felt right in 8 days. Another pause, longer, no. That silence told her something important about him. Not that he was dishonest, but that he was skilled at waiting out discomfort until it passed. That he could hold a thing in his hands and decide when to release it based on what was convenient for him. She filed it away like evidence she hoped she wouldn't need. The acquisition meant her division was under review. Her promotion, when it came, arrived through a committee she'd never met. Legitimate, documented, sourced from her client retention numbers, which were demonstrably the strongest in the firm. She verified every step. She had to, because the rumor started in HR 2 weeks later, quiet, surgical, and precise. That she'd known. That her advancement was less about performance than proximity to power. She heard it from a colleague who had the decency to look uncomfortable, delivering it the way she felt, like swallowing glass, then being asked to smile. She ended it in a text. 1 sentence, "I think we both know what this has to be." He didn't respond for 6 hours. When he did, it wasn't what she expected. "The promotion stands. I've already removed myself from oversight of your division. Not I miss you. Not please don't do this." Just the structural facts delivered cleanly. She stared at the message for a long time. Something cold spreading through her chest. He'd protected the decision. He'd protected the company. He had, in one efficient paragraph, handled her like a liability he'd already managed. She put the phone down and didn't pick it up again that night. 3 weeks of silence. Long enough to convince herself she was fine. Long enough to start believing the hollowness was just the adjustment. Then she saw the article. A business column, minor publication, but with teeth. Sources close to the Strauss board suggest CEO's recent disclosure of a personal relationship with a Hargrove employee may have been damage control rather than transparency timed. Suspiciously close to a board. Confidence vote. The journalist was speculating. The journalist didn't know anything, but the journalist had quoted someone inside the company, and the quote was specific enough to make her hands go cold. She called him. "Did you disclose to the board?" she said. "Before or after you knew the vote was coming?" Silence. "Elliot." It was the same week. "That's not what I asked." "Maya." "Before or after?" A long breath. "After 2 days after I knew." The world didn't end. The ceiling didn't fall. She just stood in her kitchen, with the phone pressed to her ear, and understood that she'd been right to file the evidence away, and wrong to hope she wouldn't need it. He'd done the right thing, he had. But he'd also done it at the moment it protected him most, and he'd let her believe it had been purely principled. "I have to go," she said. "I know," he said. He didn't argue. That almost made it worse. She went back to the waterfront because she didn't know where else to put herself. Late October. The cold had developed real conviction. She sat on the bench and watched the river and thought about the version of herself that had sat here 11 weeks ago with a resignation letter in her drafts and nothing left to lose. And she thought it was almost funny. How carefully she'd rebuilt something, and how precisely it had located the exact same crack. She heard him before she saw him. She'd memorized his footsteps on the path without meaning to, and now they were here, approaching from the left, unhurried. He sat down beside her, not with explanation, not with a prepared speech, He just sat and the cold moved between them and he didn't reach for her hand. I almost didn't come, he said. I know. I kept thinking, he stopped. Started again. I kept thinking I could explain it in a way that made sense. The timing. The disclosure. I had 4 different versions ready. A short, humorless sound that wasn't quite a laugh. They all sounded exactly like what they were. Maya looked at the water. Which was what? A man trying to manage 2 things at once and telling himself they were both priorities. He turned toward her then, and she made herself look at him, at the gray eyes that weren't doing the thing she'd cataloged them doing, that confident, unhurried focus. He looked tired. He looked like someone who'd been sitting with himself for 3 weeks and hadn't enjoyed the company. I protected the decision before I protected you, and I knew which one mattered more. Something in her chest pulled tight and then released, slow and painful, like a knot coming undone that she'd been pressing against without realizing. I don't need you to be perfect, she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. I know, his jaw tightened, but I wanted you to think I was. That's the part that should bother you. It did bother her. It also, and this was the part she'd been running from for 3 weeks, made her feel something crack open in her chest, something that had been sealed shut by years of people who'd only ever let her see the version they'd curated. He was sitting in the cold, telling her the embarrassing truth about himself without being asked to, without it benefiting him. She didn't know what to do with that. She didn't know how to want something this much and still be afraid of it. I don't know how to do this, she said. Neither do I. He said it simply, no theater. But I'm done managing it. I'd rather just, he exhaled, be in it if that's still possible. She looked at him for a long moment. The wind was cold and the river was gray and she was 34 years old with a resignation letter she'd finally deleted last week and a promotion she'd earned, and a man sitting beside her on a bench who had failed her in a specific and human way and was not pretending otherwise. She closed the distance. Not frantically. Not the way they'd kissed against the waterfront wall, urgent and desperate, and trying to outrun something. This was slower. Her hand came up to the side of his face and she felt him exhale, felt the tension leave his jaw under her palm. When their lips met, it was soft at first, almost careful, like both of them relearning something they'd gotten wrong before. Then his arms came around her and pulled her close, and the careful dissolved. He kissed her deep and slow, one hand cradling the back of her head, and she tasted the cold air and something underneath it that she couldn't name except that it felt like the opposite of the hollow thing she'd been carrying. She pressed closer. His hands tightened in her coat. They stayed like that while the river moved and the city went on being indifferent, all around them. When she finally pulled back, her forehead dropped against his. Both of them breathing, neither of them speaking. She looked at the water. It still doesn't help, she thought. But some things sitting beside you do.